Clear to play.
Now we are going to talk about the basics of a Warhammer 40k game. The first thing that you have to understand is how the models work. When you buy the codex for your army, it will come with the stat lines for every one of your models. These stat lines will include things like their strength, the number of attacks they have in close combat, their ballistic skill, their weapon skill, their initiative, their leadership, and a lot of other things, including any special rules that they have and the stat lines for the weapons they are carrying as well. Everything in Warhammer 40k works in units. You can see that there are 4 units on the board right here. On the left, we have 2 units of Chaos Cultists. And on the right, we have 2 small squads of Space Marine Tactical Marines. When a unit works together, it must move together, it must shoot together, and it must assault together. There are some exceptions to this rule. There's also independent characters who can move on their own. There are vehicles, and there are a lot of other ways that you can work around these rules as well. But in the basic game, that is how it works. To help you learn the game, we're going to do a bit of a mock battle between these Space Marines and these Chaos Cultists. This is in no means a balanced game. It doesn't really matter. Just want to show you how the game works. When the game first starts, the players find out who goes first by rolling a die. The person whose turn it is has 3 phases that they must move through in order. The first is the movement phase, the second is the shooting phase, and finally there is the assault phase, where you resolve all the close combats. The moving and shooting phase is performed by the person whose turn it is. The assault phase is unique in that both players actually act in everybody's assault phase. But we'll get to that when we cover the assault phase. Let's pretend that the Space Marines have first turn. So the very first thing that we do is we go into our movement phase. And in your movement phase, everything has to move. Now what I mean by that is that you can't move on to the shooting phase until you are done your movement. That does not mean that everything has to move more than 0 inches. You could choose when you come to a unit to say, he's not going to move at all. So the way that you move is you select the squad that is going to move, and normally they can move up to 6 inches. There are some types of units that ignore these rules, but the majority of units can move 6 inches. So you take your measuring tape and you can move each individual model up to 6 inches. They are not forced to move a total of 6 inches, it's just the restriction is no more than 6 inches. When they are moving, when they finish their movement, every model in a unit has to end within 2 inches of at least one other model in one continuous line. This is called unit coherency. So you can see that every model is within 2 inches of another one. This wouldn't work if I move these 2 over here. Even though these are within 2 inches and these are within 2 inches, the unit is not in coherency because there's more than 2 inches between these 2 groups. So that is exactly how it's supposed to work for movement. The second squad can then make its movement as well, and it can choose not to move as far if it doesn't want to, or it could even choose not to move at all. Sometimes you don't want to move because certain weapons, such as heavy weapons, require you not to move if you want to fire at full effect. Now one thing that can happen is your movement can be slowed down by difficult terrain. Difficult terrain can take many forms, such as trees or craters, or barriers, such as these sandbags. So let's pretend that there was these sandbags. So let's pretend that there were these sandbags in front of these Space Marines. Well, if they wanted to move over the sandbags, they have to do what's called a difficult terrain check. You do this by taking 2 6-sided dice, rolling them, and taking the highest value. This becomes their new maximum movement. So they could be forced to move anywhere between 1 to 6 inches at most. In this case, we rolled a 3 and a 5, so they can move up to 5 inches. Once you have rolled that, they can just move as normal, ignoring the barrier. You have to make a difficult terrain test if at least one of the models is going to pass through difficult terrain, even though the rest of the models won't be. I could decide not to go over the difficult terrain and just go around it, in which case I can move the full 6 inches, but that is up to you. Now that we have moved, we are going to move into the shooting phase. And the same thing as in the movement phase, every squad can choose to shoot or not shoot, but you have to complete all of the shooting before you move on to the assault phase. In this case, we're definitely going to want to shoot. The way that you do your shooting is you choose who is going to fire, and then you mark out the target. You're allowed to pre-measure everything. So if you're not sure if you're in range with your weapons, you could check that before you actually do your shooting. Every weapon will have a range. Now, in the case of these weapons, we have 4 of the tactical Marines who are armed with bolters, and we have the captain, or the sergeant, who is armed with a bolt pistol. A bolt pistol has a maximum range of 12 inches. So we measure that out. We see that at least one of the Chaos Cultists from this group are within 12 inches. And that's all we need. We only need at least one of them. But the other weapons, because they have a special rule called rapid fire, they actually have 2 ranges. Within 12 inches, they can fire twice. And within 24 inches, they can fire once. So what we can do here is measure. This Space Marine is within 12 inches, so he will fire twice. This Space Marine is outside of 12, but obviously he's going to be within 24. So he will only fire once. And then these 2 are outside of 12 as well, so they will only fire once. So the total number of shots that we have is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then because he has 2, it becomes 5, 6. So now that we know how many shots we have, we take that number of 6-sided dice. So I pick up 6 dice. Now, in order to determine whether they hit their target, we roll with a target number in mind. Now, the target number for shooting is the ballistic skill. Now, the target number for shooting is determined by the ballistic skill. In the case of the Space Marines, they have a ballistic skill of 4, which means they are going to hit on a 3+. The way that you calculate that is you take the number 7 and you subtract the ballistic skill of the models who are firing. And if there are different ballistic skills, which there are not in this case, you would roll dice for each model with their own ballistic skill. Or if there were different profiles for the weapons, you would roll them all separately as well. But because these weapons all have the same strength and the same armor penetration, which we'll talk about in a second, then we'll just roll them all together. Now, the Space Marines have a ballistic skill of 4, so 7 minus 4 is 3, which means I have to roll 3 or higher on 6 dice. So I did a particularly good roll, and I managed to hit 5 times. This one is a miss, so I will put it aside. Now that we have hit the cultists, we have to roll to determine if we actually managed to wound them. To do this, we compare the strength of the weapon that the Space Marines are using against the toughness of the Chaos Cultists. Now, in this case, the strength of the bolt weapons, the bolt guns and the bolt pistols, are all strength 4. And the toughness of the Chaos Cultists is 3. So when we look at the chart, which is provided in the Warhammer 40k rulebook, and we compare the strength of 4 to a toughness of 3, we see that we need to roll a 3 or higher. So once again, we have to roll 3+. But that is unrelated to the ballistic skill. So let's see how many wounds we inflict. So that's a half-decent roll. The 1 and the 2 fail to wound, so we take those away. So we have inflicted a total of 3 wounds. Now the Chaos Cultists get to see if they shrug off that damage. This can be done in one of 3 ways. They're all called saves. There's an armor save, a cover save, and an invulnerable save. An armor save is how strong your armor happens to be. This could be a 6+, 5+, 4+, all the way down to a 2+. The Chaos Cultists have an armor save of 6+. In other words, their armor is not very good. The Tactical Marines have an armor save of 3+, because they're wearing very powerful armor. If there was cover in the way, such as this barrier, that would grant what's called a cover save. In the case of this barrier, it would grant a 4+ cover save. And an invulnerable save is a special save that only certain models have. It's usually provided by some psychic power or some sort of shielding that can't be penetrated with armor-penetrating weapons. An invulnerable save you can always take. Now in this case, they did not have the barrier in front of them, and they have an armor save of 6+. However, weapons can also have an armor-penetrating value. In the case of these bolt weapons, the bolt guns and bolt pistol, the armor penetrating is 5, which means they ignore armor of 5+ or 6+. So that means they're going to ignore the Chaos Cultist armor altogether. So I'm not even going to bother to roll because it is ignored. So they've inflicted 3 total wounds, which means we start from the front and we remove 3 cultists. And they have to be the ones that are closest to the Space Marines. So we have 1, 2, and 3. That concludes this squad's shooting. Now you'll notice that they had to all shoot at the same target. They couldn't split their shots to this squad and this squad. And so if there was only one of these guys left, and all these guys fired and they inflicted 5 wounds, well, the extra 4 wounds would be wasted. So you have to really determine who you're going to shoot at based on that. So now we'll have the second squad fire. So they're going to fire at the one that is closest to them. The sergeant is within 12 inches. This Space Marine is within 12 inches, so he gets to fire twice. This one looks like he's just out of 12, which means these ones are as well. So they're going to have the same number of shots, which will be 6, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now this should be quite quick because we already know the stats. We need a 3+ in order to hit. And I roll really well, making all my hits. And then we need a 3+ in order to wound. And I don't roll so well, I only make half of them. The 3 ones do nothing. But we know that they don't have any cover, and that their armor is ignored by the bolt guns and bolt pistol. So the 3 closest die. Once the shooting phase is over, we have to determine if the squads who have been hit by the shooting and have taken casualties need to take what is called leadership checks. We're not going to cover that right now because it gets into a few more advanced things. So we're going to ignore leadership. So we're just going to pretend that everything is fearless and is not affected by leadership whatsoever. Now we move into the assault phase. The way the assault phase works is the units can now declare assaults in which they target and try to get into close combat. Now the Space Marines will not be doing this for 2 reasons. One, they're pretty far away. The maximum charge range that you'll ever get is 12 inches, and it's random, so it'll be hard for them to get there. But more importantly, they fired rapid fire weapons. And one of the restrictions of rapid fire weapons is that you are not allowed to assault after you have fired them. So now we can move into the Chaos turn. So just like with the Space Marine turn, the Chaos have 3 phases: movement phase, shooting phase, and assault phase. Let's start with the moving phase, because that's what you're supposed to do. This squad will go first, so they get to move 6 inches. Now these guys want to get as close as they can to the Space Marines, because their weapons are only 12-inch range, and because they actually want to try to charge them. And their weapons allow them to charge after firing because they are assault weapons, which you will find in the Warhammer 40k rulebook. This squad will also move up 6 inches. You notice that I'm keeping them together. Sometimes it's just faster once you've measured out the 6 inches in front, just to move your other models approximately. It helps if your opponent is okay with this. The game goes much faster. Now we are in the shooting phase. So this squad is going to fire at this squad. Now it's very important when you choose your targets if you plan on assaulting, because you must assault whatever you shot at. So they know that they want to assault this squad, so they're going to fire at them. Now they only have auto pistols. Auto pistols have a range of 12 inches and they're only strength 3. So they're not going to be as powerful against the Space Marines, especially because the Space Marines actually have a higher toughness. Their toughness is 4. So let's measure to see how many are within 12 inches. And it looks like all of them are. So there are 6 cultists, which means they have 6 shots in total. They have 1 shot per pistol. So we take our 6 dice. Now the ballistic skill of the cultists is only 3. 7 minus 3 is 4, which means they have to roll 4 or higher. So they're not as accurate as the Space Marines. And it doesn't help that the roll wasn't very good either. Only 2 managed to hit. Now that we know that 2 hit, we're going to roll to see if they wound. But an auto pistol is only strength 3, and the tactical Marines have a toughness of 4. Now when we refer to the chart in the Warhammer 40k rulebook, we find that we need to roll 5 or higher in order to inflict a wound. So we're going to roll to see how many wounds they manage to inflict, if any. And unfortunately, a 2 and a 3 just isn't good enough. Now the second squad is going to pre-measure to see who they'll be in most contact with for 12 inches. Now it looks like the guy in the back won't be able to fire at this squad, but would be able to fire at this squad if everybody targeted it. But I want all the cultists to charge this squad of Space Marines, because I know if I charge 1-on-1, then I'll have a hard time, because the Space Marines are actually pretty strong in close combat. So this squad is going to target this squad of tactical Marines. But that means the guy in the back, he's out of range. His 12 inches comes up to about here. So he's not going to be able to fire, but that's okay. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 cultists who can fire. So we take our 7 dice, and we know already that we need to roll 4 or higher in order to hit. They don't have much better luck. They only managed 3 hits. And we know that they need to roll 5s in order to inflict a wound. And they managed to inflict 1 wound. Now the Space Marines get to roll their armor save. Their armor save is a 3+, and the auto pistol's armor penetration is not good enough to ignore 3+. So they get to roll to see if they ignore it. So if they roll a 3+, they'll shrug off the wound. And they get lucky, so no wound is inflicted. So it's as if it didn't wound at all.